thank you. Hi, everyone. This is Claudia Center, and I'm welcoming you to Services and Supports for Care Court Respondents Part 2. This is the presentation we organized when we ran out of time for our presentation on March 25th. Both of these presentations will be available on our website as in a video. And just so you know, we are putting together the process for giving people MCLE for self-study, which means that your colleagues who aren't here today will shortly be able to watch our videos for self-study MCLE, which gives another option for everybody. Not yet implemented, but soon. Next slide. Our speakers today are Karis Myrick, who is the Vice President of Partnerships at Inseparable, very talented and knowledgeable about effective supports for people with different psychiatric or mental health diagnoses, labels, conditions, and so on. Myself, Claudia Center, Legal Director at Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund, and my colleague Kavya Parthaban, Staff Attorney with DREDF. DREDF is a support center in the care court system. So as you have problems with getting services for your clients who are care court respondents, please reach out to me or Kavya. We're easy to find, and we will do what we can to help. Next slide. So here are the topics that we're going to review today. And really the ones on the left are mostly a recap of part one. We just want to reorient everybody, or if there are people here who didn't go to part one, just a quick reorientation. We'll really be kind of going through those quite quickly. So a number of concepts here is person-centered planning, specialty mental health services, full service partnership, peer support, CalAIM. And then we're going to talk about some services and supports we didn't get to last time. And those are on the right side of the slide, and include regional centers, in-home supportive services, evidence-based and evidence-informed practices, supported decision-making, some additional topics around peer support, and then we have some slides and information about bridge housing and care court. Next slide. Okay, this is our colleague Karis. Take it away.
Hi, this is Karis. Thank you for bringing me back again. So I actually wanted us to start in this place of moving beyond engagement to activation. A lot of times we talk about and why care court exists is because people may be struggling with access, and then we hear that, oh, wow, now they're struggling with being engaged. Yet we actually also struggle with engagement and need to think about how do we move towards activation. So let's think about this for a second. So what we know from research, and probably what we're seeing, is that about up to a third of people who are given serious mental illness diagnoses actually disengage from treatment. It's actually a lot. And then we also know that about 58% of people don't go to their follow-up first appointment after discharge from inpatient settings. So this is why it's really important from moving from just engagement to actually activation. And a lot of things that we're going to be talking about a bit later will actually aid in helping people in activation. So let's think of it this way if we're going to define these two terms. Engagement is when I go and see the clinician. So I just went, I saw the clinician. That's considered engagement. Activation is when I act on mutually agreed upon treatment plans. And when we think again about CARE Act, there is a care plan and there's a I forget what the other one is called, but they're two different types of care plans. But both of them are supposed to be created alongside the person who is in this process. So those are supposed to be mutually agreed upon, which is maybe one way that can help with engagement, but we'll talk about other ways related to those evidence-informed practices that can actually help with moving from engagement to activation. That's the goal. And I think it's also the goal when you think of your role as the person who's working with the respondent, is how do you also move that person from I've just shown up to talk to you to actually now they're engaged in the process of being able to identify what they want and how they want it in an activated way. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. Just wanted to start by introducing those concepts and why they're so important.
Thanks, Karis. Now we're going to do some slides with Kavya.
This is Kavya. Can I get the next slide? We're going to briefly go over what person-centered planning was. So person-centered planning is a collaborative process where you are, and the person that's being worked with, is identifying what that person's strengths, goals, and needs are. We need to prioritize their choice, their control, and self-determination in that. Think about accessibility. There's no wrong door, meaning that you have to figure out what is the most accessible for that person and what's the easiest for them to use. You meet people where they're at, and you don't just think about their medical needs, but you also think about things like recreation, transportation, how do we build relationships, housing, therapies, social activities, their culture, etc. And also dignity of risk, meaning that we're allowing the person to make choices that sometimes we may not agree with, because that's the dignity that we give everyone else. Next slide, please. We also talked about specialty mental health services. So specialty mental health services is an intensive mental health support that can be given to a person. It's provided directly through a county's mental health plan. It gives you more than a typical managed care plan. So more therapy options, day programs, etc. And you can apply through your county screening systems, and the link is in that slide for you all. Next slide, please. And we also want to remind people that they have rights if they're trying to access specialty mental health services. So when a person gets approved for specialty mental health services, they have something called a care plan, which sounds pretty similar to ours. And in that care plan, that person's also saying what their goals are, their treatment objectives, and what services they want. These services are an entitlement, and they have due process rights. So that means, a client can file a grievance, or they can file an appeal if they're getting a denial or a reduction in services, and et cetera. A county and the providers that provide specialty mental health services have to give information to that person about how to file grievances and appeals and how to seek a fair hearing. Next slide, please.
So this is for me, this is Claudia. So full service partnership is a really important term for you all to know when you're interacting with your county mental health agency on behalf of your clients. The concept is it's a partnership between the person being served and the service providers, in which the client is offered a full array of services with a whatever it takes approach. The target or the population that is eligible for a full service partnership is very closely aligned with the people who are care court respondents. It's people with significant mental illness who are unhoused or at risk of being unhoused, have history of involvement with the criminal legal system, or have repeat hospitalizations. The person may get an individualized services and supports plan. FSP is a little different from specialty mental health services because it's not an entitlement. It's in addition to the Medicaid services. And there's no strict rules about how the county decides who gets an FSP slot, other than they have to prioritize people who are unserved. So that gives you a role as the lawyer for the respondent to advocate to get your client a slot for FSP. Next slide. So the FSP dollars come from, actually now it's been renamed, the Behavioral Health Services Act, previously the Mental Health Services Act. And the idea that is important for you all is that FSP provides not only mental health supports, but also non-mental health supports. And we know that care court respondents have a lot of unmet needs that are not about mental health supports. When the system is providing the mental health supports, they're going to be trying to use Medi-Cal dollars as much as possible, because that's where you get the federal dollar match. And so when there are Medi-Cal dollars being used, there is that entitlement and right to a grievance and so on. So just kind of keep that in mind. Next slide. So in FSP, there's just a lot of flexibility about what FSP dollars can go for. It can go for supportive services in employment, housing. It can be for a needs assessment. It can be for crisis intervention. It can be peer support. So a lot of different mental health supports can be provided through an FSP using either Medi-Cal dollars or the Behavioral Health Services Act dollars, but very broad list, and there's citation on the slide. Next slide. And this is the one, of course, that may be relevant for your care court clients. It also can provide non-mental health supports such as food, clothing, housing, and some out-of-pocket costs and respite care. Now, in practice, the housing that is provided by FSP is not really permanent housing over time. It can usually pay for some residential treatment housing or some short-term first few months of housing or temporary housing. But even so, it's really important that that option is at least theoretically available. Next slide. And wherever you're practicing, the reality is going to be very local. You want to know your county's mental health plan and phone number. You want to be connected with your county mental health agency. You want to develop relationships, regular communication. You want their emails. You want to figure out who's the supervisor of who's the supervisor of who. And, you know, because you are going to have to advocate because you know, people slip through the cracks. And when you look at this, you're going to want to know what skills and material resources are available, what are the lowest entryway supports, and how do people access supports. Next slide. And this is Karis.
Hi, yes, Karis here again. So just a recap about peer support. Like, what is peer support? What do they do? So let's start off with peer support. So peers are people with lived experience or living experience of a mental health and substance use condition who support another person who has a similar condition. In California, we both have certified peer specialists, which are Medicaid reimbursable. They can provide Medicaid reimbursable peer services. And then we have peer supporters who may not be certified and who are still working and providing a lot of the different types of peer support. They're just not billing Medicaid. For those that are billing Medicaid, I think it is a county opt-in, and there are only 3 or 4 counties that haven't opted in, but they still may have peer support. So just want to make sure that if you hear, oh, they don't have certified peer support, it doesn't mean that they don't have other types of peer support. So peers are very effective in engaging people in collaborative and caring relationships. They teach both information and skills related to health, wellness, and recovery. They help people to manage crisis. I think the biggest thing is they serve as an example for a person who may be struggling of what the possibilities are. Sometimes, we are working with people who may not meet another person who has experienced some of the struggles they have with their mental health condition and or substance use condition. So seeing someone doing well, seeing someone working is an example to them of what the possibilities are that maybe they didn't think was actually possible. So there's great evidence around peer support and their effectiveness in helping people reduce hospitalization and have longer tenure in the community, as well as being able to remain in treatment. And that's part of that activation thing I was talking about earlier. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to the next slide.
Okay, this is me. This is Claudia. So we have a new Medicaid waiver in California called CalAIM, and it's basically a Medicaid waiver that provides enhanced care management benefit. So this is a managed care waiver that is supposed to give people much more case management and the option of having a trained provider coordinate and manage care for the client. And this we know is very important when clients or care court respondents are overwhelmed by the number of appointments and the phone calls and the systems. And so CalAIM is supposed to be an approach for coordinating all of those services and making sure that the client gets a lead care manager that supports access. There's also an optional community service benefits waiver that many of the counties have opted into. And this provides supports around housing, but again, it's somewhat limited. It's about short-term housing, finding housing, and housing deposits. And the LAO report has said that the community service providers have been frustrated because of the lack, and I'm sure the respondents and clients are even more frustrated about the lack of housing options that exist in the real world. But this can be an important option. The LAO report also describes how there's a lot more room to have more people enrolled in this program, and the capacity, they're still under enrollment. So there's space for getting a client this service. Next slide. This is Kavya.
This is Kavya. I'm going to briefly talk to you all about regional centers and what services they could provide your clients. Next slide, please. So why are we talking about the regional center? The most recent California Health Policy report that came out stated that between 6 to 17% of folks who are experiencing homelessness have a developmental disability in California. And this is important to note because most of our care court respondents might also have housing instability, and their developmental disabilities might not be being checked or accommodated. A developmental disability is typically a condition that starts in childhood, and it affects how a person learns or interacts or grows. And it can include a wide range of disabilities like intellectual disability, cerebral palsy, epilepsy, autism, and other similar conditions. And these developmental disabilities might affect how a care court respondent might be able to follow through on services and treatment if we don't give them those proper services. Next slide, please. So some developmental disabilities qualify for service and supports through the Regional Center under the Lanterman Act. And under the Lanterman Act, the Regional Center is meant to support people with developmental disabilities in living full, productive, and independent lives. The plans that they make are supposed to honor what a person states that they want and help them live the life that they want to lead. Under the Landerman Act, a qualifying disability is one that starts before the age of 18, includes one of 5 conditions: cerebral palsy, epilepsy, autism, intellectual disability, or other conditions closely related to intellectual disability. And that disability must be substantial disability. What substantial disability means is you have to have 3 of 5 characteristics showing that the disability affects your ability to live independently or manage your finances or learn, etc. Next slide, please. If a person qualifies for a regional center, the regional center must evaluate and decide if a person is eligible, first of all. Then they must coordinate services for that person. They develop something that's like a contract called the Individual Program Plan, an IPP, with the consumer, where the person asks the regional center that these are the goals that I have, these are what services that I think would help me reach my goals, and the regional center looks at that and their needs to give them a service plan. And they have to ensure that all consumers receive all the supports and services that are listed in that contract. Next slide, please. So in the case of housing instability, what the Landerman Act says is that the regional center must provide emergency and crisis services to a person to help them stay in their home or to help them get housing. And if those services are unsuccessful, they must provide emergency community housing. I'll get to that. Next slide. So regional centers, when they're working with a client, they typically provide services that are not available elsewhere. So when the regional center is working with your client, they might see if Medi-Cal can provide them the service or if another agency can provide them the service. But they're not allowed to just drop the ball and say, I'm going to wait until this other county agency gives you the service. In the meantime, they're supposed to be filling the gaps. So that can help someone who's, on long wait lists. Although it might be difficult for someone to get regional services later on in life, a person can still apply as long as they have some sort of records or ways to show that their disability is a qualifying developmental disability and it started before the age of 18. They might be regional service eligible. And if you're in doubt of whether or not your care court respondent qualifies for the regional center, it's still worth trying to apply because there's more services and housing options that become open and available for someone if they are regional center eligible. Next slide.
And this is me, Claudia, and I wanted to add to the regional center point is sometimes somebody may have been qualified as a young person and then the regional center lost track of the person. And so you may also find that your person is actually already qualified. There's just been a disruption in the service, and it's an important option. So IHSS, next slide, stands for In-Home Services and Supports, and it's a Medi-Cal program that pays for caregivers for people with disabilities. Most caregivers are family members, but there are also people who make this their job. They become certified as an IHSS provider and get clients who aren't family members. And this can help a person stay organized and on track in a way that can be helpful to recovery. And often the caregiver is a trusted supporter, typically. So covered services might include housework, laundry, meals, dressing, bathing, assistance with medications, assistance with money management. IHSS can prevent homelessness. Now, one thing to know is that IHSS cannot be provided to someone who is completely unhoused, like if they're in an encampment, but there are some there is an option for IHSS to be provided to people who are marginally housed, such as in a shelter or an RV. It's called an alternative living arrangement. So we have some links to those there. So this is really a support that's most relevant for care court respondents who are housed in some way. Next slide. Okay, back to Karis.
Okay, thank you. And I want to say something about IHSS, if that's okay. I actually was an IHSS what do you call it, client. And I cannot say how much that helped me when I was really struggling with being able to stay in my home. And it was not a family member, it was somebody who did this as a job. And it was so helpful in keeping me organized, as you said, Claudia, being able to help me with getting my groceries because I couldn't do those things. And it really, it was a lifesaver is all I could say. And it's something in mental health that we don't hear much about, but we know about it through other disabilities. That's how I learned about it and was able to advocate for it. So yay for the IHSS is what I'm saying. Living example. All right, so let's talk about evidence-based and evidence-informed practices. And let me define evidence-informed since that might be a term that folks are not quite familiar with, because in our field, we talk a lot about evidence-based practices and EBPs. So evidence-based practices generally are have undergone rigorous studies, usually some kind of random controlled trial, and many times may not include populations that are underserved or just not served, basically. So we might not find a lot of studies related to people who identify as LGBTQ. We may not find a lot of studies with, populations that are Black and Brown or people of color or who are non-English speaking. So we have to ask ourselves sometimes, well, who are those EBPs evidenced on? Where evidence-informed practices help us and help providers think about the context, the person's preferences, and they have some evidence behind them, but they may not meet that as of yet gold standard of having random controlled trials, et cetera, to be considered quote unquote evidence-based. But they still have evidence to work with particular populations, particular people, et cetera. So I'm going to talk about a few evidence-based, evidence-informed practices, medication empowerment, wellness recovery action plan, or WRAP, psychiatric advance directives, and also recovery-oriented cognitive therapy, or CTR for short. Okay, next slide. So we're going to talk about medication empowerment. And a lot of times, particularly for this population that we're talking about who may be respondents in care court, there's a lot of focus on wanting the person to stick with their medication, which now we use the term medication adherence versus medication compliance. And sometimes that's really difficult. Many times, people with chronic illnesses, according to research, have a hard time sticking with their medication. It doesn't actually matter what their diagnosis is. About 50% of people struggle to stick with taking their medication as prescribed. So then we have to think about different ways to help people not get in the binary of they're taking their medication, they're not taking your medication. Take your medication, don't take your medication. It's probably far more nuanced than that, and we have to work in having conversations with people about what does it mean to take medication to you. So let's turn to the next slide. So medication empowerment, designed by Dr. Pat Deegan, who has a whole host of things that she has developed as a psychologist, as a researcher, and also as a person who was given a diagnosis of schizophrenia. She's developed this thing called, or approach called medication empowerment. And what it does is it helps people have a voice and choice in finding the treatment that's right for them, so that it's not, again, about take it or don't take it. It's really about talking about the life that the person wants to have. What kind of life do you want to have? How do you want to get there? And what role does medication play in that? Is kind of where we're going with this. So instead of thinking about it as a yes or no, it helps people identify like the challenges they may be having related to taking psychiatric medication, which exists in about 9 basic areas. And so let's move to the next slide to talk a little bit about what this looks like. Oh no, we got rid of that slide. So let's go back. My bad. All right, so let me just keep talking about what this is. All right, so there are 9 common areas related to like using psychiatric medication. It may be something like, I can't remember to take my medication. I don't like the side effects of the medication, things like that. And so it also can be things like if a person is using substances, for example. So when we think about medication and empowerment, what we're trying to do is talk to people about, again, what is it? What is the life that you are trying to achieve, and how do you want to get there? So even you and your role as a lawyer, when you're talking to somebody, that might even be a question you ask. Is like dig kind of deep into what is the person's goal, and helping them think about what is the role that medication may play and what are the barriers that they have related to medication that then they can bring into the conversation with their supporters, their family, their treatment team. You can learn more about medication empowerment at this website, and you can also take some of the courses in order to fully understand medication empowerment and use some of the tools. There are worksheets and tools that folks can use. So I think that's really important to point out too. All right, next slide. So the next thing I want to talk about is Wellness Recovery Action Plan. There are many, many peers in California who have been trained in RAP, which is an evidence-based practice. It has been studied. And what Wellness Recovery Action Plan does is it helps you kind of break apart like thinking about when you're doing well and when you're not doing well. You didn't wake up one morning and you're well, and then the next morning you're like, wow, you're out on the street and you're not well. There's lots of stuff that happened in between. So Wellness Recovery Action Plan helps a person kind of break it down and then develop simple tools along the way. So if they're doing well, what does that look like and what helps you stay well? Well, let's say that you're not doing as well. What things might you dig into those strengths or those things that when you're doing well might help you when you're not doing as well? As you're developing this wellness recovery action plan, and the reason that I bring it up is that it can also help you think about what you might put in a psychiatric advance directive. A lot of times asking a person straight up, well, gee, what would help you stay well? They don't even know, right? So this kind of helps a person sort of break it apart into bits and pieces and then think about, okay, how do I gain and stay in control and have support as well in a time of crisis because you've written it out. Let's go to the next slide so I can talk about Psychiatric Advance Directive, or PADS. So PADS are a legal document. Of course, in each state, it's a little bit different, but basically they're like health proxies is a way to think about them. There are documents that help a person identify their preferences for future mental health treatment, especially when they're not able to speak from themselves when they are in a crisis. So they're developed when a person is well enough to consider those preferences. That's why RAP plans are really great, because you're already thinking about those things, and use when you become unable to make those decisions during a mental health crisis. And we have seen in research that peers who have worked and facilitated PADS with the client have shown fewer compulsory or forced, if you will, forced treatment rehospitalization as compared to control group. So we've done these studies in California, and there's still work around how to ensure that peers can support others in completing a psychiatric advance directive, especially during this process, so that it can uh, maybe reduce use of further compulsory treatment. Okay, next slide. All right, so now we're going to talk about this thing called recovery-oriented cognitive therapy. And CTR is going to be a lot easier to call it versus that long name. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. So recovery-oriented cognitive therapy, or CTR, really helps people in their flourishing. And when I use the term flourishing, it is the same as using the term recovery, feeling better, getting better, feeling more well. And the reason that the term flourishing is used is it's also used in physical health, and it also maps against our mental health and substance use recovery principles. So a lot of times the things that people struggle with are the very same things that people are struggling with in who are respondents in care court, which is they may have limited access to community resources, or maybe those resources themselves are limited. They can be disconnected from loved ones, a lot of isolation. They can feel stigma or be stigmatized. Um, they may have restrictions in being able to work and or challenges in that work. When it says vocational, I'm going to say avocational too. So it may even, they may even have struggles connecting to things that are, uh, just things they enjoy in their life, like hobbies and things like that. And particularly with our population, there's unstable housing. And sometimes even when they have like housing and are moving into some of these new areas, they have this adjustment to kind of their new normal, if you will. All right, so let's go to the next slide. So what does this look like? And this is kind of really interesting as far as some of the things that people are struggling with. And then how you as lawyers, like maybe you're not going to practice CTR, but you certainly can use the framework to connect to people. So a lot of times people are not feeling very empowered. They feel very defeated, and they don't feel like they can actually achieve something that they would hope to achieve. So they become disengaged in participating in the community or taking action towards like the life that they want to live. This is also very much about what is the life that you want to live and what are the challenges that are getting in the way of that. And I think many people can identify and relate to this on a personal level, whether you have a diagnosis of schizophrenia or any other mental health diagnoses, of when you become self-defeating. Well, that can kind of really happen to people when they try something and they fail and they don't have the supports to help them give it another try again. So that kind of becomes self-defeating. Um, they also, what they try to work on in CTR is helping people feel empowered and giving a try at something that they didn't try before. Also building upon like experiences or skills that you already have, finding out from people like, what is it like when you're leading your best life? What does that look like? Do you remember what that looks like? Well, let's talk about that so that it can get people back in touch with their life when it was going well. Because sometimes when it's not going well, that's all we're talking about is how crap ass your life is, just being honest, right? So instead, we want to help people remember, oh, yeah, that's right. I did do this and I did achieve that, to touch back into that person so that they can use those innate skills and abilities in their recovery. So it also helps the system change when folks can see whether it's providers, supporters, lawyers, whomever, people start to self-actuate. It actually starts to have a belief that people who have been struggling for such a long time have this ability to recover. I think we still sort of struggle with that when we think about schizophrenia and recovery, that well, maybe they won't really recover. Yeah, they will. And when you see it, then you believe it, and it becomes exciting and starts to have culture change in the system. All right, let's move to the next slide. All right, so let's talk about this identity that people are struggling with and why it's important. I'm sorry, let's go to the next slide. All right. So a lot of times people are struggling with their own identity, and then they don't know, like clinicians don't know how to work with that person when it's the other person's identity that they're struggling with, right? So it creates more internalized stigma and prolonged sort of lower functioning than really needs be. So when I think about myself as a person who was diagnosed with schizophrenia, just giving an example, it was hard for anybody to work with me in understanding who I was as a full person rather than as thinking about me and my symptoms and trying to reduce those symptoms. And it was sort of this prophecy, if you will, that just kept perpetuating around low expectations and, oh my gosh, she's really sick. And so that became sort of my identity, but we don't know how to pop out of that. And that turns into self stigma, where a person then has their own internalized belief or self stigma about their inability to do certain things. Next slide. So, here's some of the beliefs that it can kind of turn into, and it can also impact their family members. So, if I personally have this belief, I'm broken, I'm a failure, I'm a burden to my family, family beliefs look like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be judged, or things will never be the same. This is going to be my life, and this is kind of a burden. So, collectively, we all have shame, embarrassment, and we move towards hopelessness. And the behavior then becomes sort of isolation and disengagement. It also can look like loss of family identity and activities. I mean, even the language we use, consumer family, kind of helps kind of segregate us from that family unit that we may want to be a part of, and can perpetuate, again, sort of stigma, not just for the person, but also for the family member. Next slide. All right. So this is what it can kind of look like. And you might have seen these maybe in one of my previous presentations. I call them my recovery circles. So it's sort of been put together here so you can see what we're moving from to what we're moving to. So the focus generally when we're working with people is on their symptoms and symptom reduction and all of the care that they're going to get to reduce those symptoms. While they have all these other things out there that they're really interested in or that have been moved to the back, and they've been told, well, we'll focus on those things later. It can be work, it can be school, community, family connections, etc. Right now, we're going to focus on this treatment plan that's going to get those symptoms down, and that's where we're going to look at. But if we sort of turn that on its head, which CTR does, and we start to work with the person with living and lived experience on what is their focus. And their focus might be, I want to talk about my treatment plan. I want to talk about medications. Aha, okay, to what end? I really want to get back to work, and maybe the medications will help with my concentration to get me back to work. So now we're starting to put pieces together about the whole person's life and their identity and their personhood. And that becomes the preferred focus. So when I was talking about the care plan or the care agreement, those are the kind of things that really help to, I would say, broaden and enrich the care plan or the care agreement. I'm just making up my own words. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So we're putting together, as I said, flourishing and also some of the other social determinants of wellness. And we're kind of collapsing it into this one thing. And that's what recovery-oriented cognitive therapy does. Now, you're kind of like, okay, I'm a lawyer, I'm a supporter, I'm a social worker who's supporting somebody in this process. What does this mean for me? I'm just trying to give you kind of a foundation of where all this came from. And when we think about terms that we hear like recovery, there are domains of recovery, which is connection, control, feeling valued, contribution, and safety, which also match to social determinants of wellness. And that's again where the focus for CTR is. It's not on the symptoms and symptom reduction, it's actually on the opposite of that. And I'll show you what that means in a second. So, next slide. All right. So, our goal in CTR is to mitigate risk, if you will. Well, it's not really to mitigate risk, but that's one of the things that can happen because what we're trying to do is increase the connection, the hope, purpose, and empowerment so that we can reduce things like antisocial kind of stuff that's going on, housing instability, either due to symptoms or otherwise, substance misuse, poor family marital relationships and education, and then lack of pro-social leisure activities, meaning you're doing leisure activities, but they might be kind of very dangerous for you. All right, so let's go to the next slide. All right, so what are we doing here? So we are not focusing on symptoms and symptom reduction. We are focusing on life, and getting people in the adaptive mode. So as the lawyer, as the clinician, you want to learn about and access each person's best self. That's their adaptive mode. Everybody has it. You have it. Think of when you've been your best self and when you haven't. And then it's like you tap into that thing that helps you be yourself, best self, in order to feel better, be better, and excel. Everybody has it. What we want to do is tap into it. So we want to engage people in meaningful daily connections and activities within their community. But let's start with maybe a conversation that you might have with someone and you're struggling because they're not really able to connect with you as the lawyer kind of related to this work. So you might want to stop and say, you know what, why don't you tell me about your best day? What did that look like? And the person might not know what that is because it's been a long time since somebody ever asked them. So gives them some time and maybe share something about your best day and share like how that best day helped you live your best life. And that's when you got into your adaptive mode. You do not have to use the word adaptive mode with them. I'd highly suggest not, because who talks like that? We don't. We just talk about best self. So that might help them think back to, yeah, I remember when I used to skateboard. I was the baddest skateboard on the block. I could do this, I could do that. And then you could ask a person more about what did that feel like and how did you learn that? And you just didn't get on a skateboard and get good. What did you do? And so now you're starting to engage them in something that you'll see their whole body language change. You might hear them get a little bit more excited. And now here's where you want to talk about, well, now what do you want your best self to look like? And let's talk about what steps would you want in your treatment plan or in your care plan, if you will, to get you there. So you can use techniques within CTR in order to develop that relationship and help a person move into their adaptive mode. So it makes it easier for them to have connections and think about the things that they want to do in order to get to their best life. Hoping this all makes sense. Okay, let's go to the next slide. All right. So many of you may have heard of CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy developed by Dr. Aaron Beck. Dr. Aaron Beck was a brilliant man. He died at the age of 100 a couple years ago. He also, along with Dr. Paul Grant, who is alive and much younger, developed CTR, recovery-oriented cognitive therapy. And what they realized is that there were people who were stuck on the back wards, if you will, of hospitals or other types of programs who were not progressing, and basically no one knew what to do. And that focus for those folks tended to be on their symptoms. Well, if they give them more medication, or, oh, well, their symptoms aren't going to get better, so let's just live with it as it was. They really started to recognize that focusing on the symptoms, which is that positive thing in front of them, or that negative thing in front of them, they had to flip. And they had to focus on what was getting in the way of that person achieving. And generally, what they found out is that many of their symptoms were driving sort of an underlying or cognitive belief about what they wanted to achieve. So, quick example, it's not a real one, I'm just going to make up one, is someone believes they're a millionaire, so they're continuing to steal and give the money to poor people. They're living in somebody else's house because they think that somehow as a millionaire they should be doing that. I don't know why, but let's just say that this is their belief. So in a recovery-oriented cognitive therapy, instead of trying to unpack that with like cognitive behavioral techniques, which is like doing a lot of homework and reality testing, not going to do that. What we're going to do though is ask a person, well, can you tell me why that's important for you to do that? Like, why is it, sorry, my light just went out. Why is it important for you to steal money? Tell me what's good about that. And they might tell you, well, it's really good because I get to give it to poor people and I'm a millionaire because I get to help people. So the underlying belief is that person gets to help people. So our job is to help that person help people without the need of the delusion. and to put them in situations where they may be helpful to others, to bring up when they may be helpful to others, so that it starts to diminish the need for the delusion or voices and increases the reality that they can actually do that. They're not failing at it, they actually are very good at it. So that's sort of the underpinning behind how CTR works. And I didn't even know this thing was called CTR. Um, and when I got to meet with Dr. Beck and Dr. Grant and realized that this is something that my psychiatrist was doing with me, even though we didn't have this terminology, but it was the same sort of approach, helping me see that I was capable, reminding me that the thing I loved was research and reading research and understanding research. So every meeting, if we had to change something that was in my treatment plan, he would bring research and we would sit and talk about the research. Now, granted, that's about my symptoms, but he was using my adaptive mode in order to pull me out of being a perpetual client into being the person I really am, which is kind of like an analytical creative researcher. Okay, how cool is that? All right, so that's sort of what we're doing with CTR. We don't have CTR training in California, but again, you can use this framework, and hopefully we're going to bring CTR training into California. Next slide. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Claudia.
Hi, this is Claudia, and we wanted to mention one more evidence-based or evidence-informed approach, which is assertive community treatment. Next slide. ACT is a community-based, team-based service that typically includes mental health providers as well as peers in a team model, and provides services on a day-to-day basis, including 24/7 crisis intervention. In a lot of the Olmstead settlements across the country, ACT is one of the required components of the settlement because it is a way to stabilize people, to help people not be re-hospitalized, and to instead have some services on a prompt basis where the client is geographically in the material world, and can really help reduce rehospitalization and other forms of being forced to leave the community and be at really high levels of care. So you can find out if you have ACT in your county and try and learn about that in case it's relevant to your client. Some additional practices that are evidence-based and evidence informed are housing first, which is trying to set up a connection to permanent supportive housing. There are a lot of California documents that say that California endorses housing first, but it's really not the reality in the real world a lot of times. And then also volunteer peer support is another important thing to think about. And those are like peer support networks that exist outside of, the formal mental health system. So it could be, just like a depression support group or a drop-in center or that kind of thing. Next slide. Okay, Kavya.
This is Kavya. We're also going to discuss supported decision-making with you all briefly. Next slide. So supportive decision-making is a voluntary and individualized arrangement where a disabled person works with someone that they trust to help them understand, communicate, implement, and act on their own choices. It is a great alternative to conservatorship or guardianship because in the case of conservatorship, we assess a person without their supports and says, we're appointing someone else to make these legal decisions or decisions for a person. But with SDM, a person can be able to, with support, articulate and act upon their own choices and not put it on someone else. SDM strengthens the capacity of a disabled person, and it can be formal or informal. The trusted person is called a supporter, and that supporter helps them understand their choices. In California, SDM is formally recognized under the bill AB 1663. Next slide, please. So what role can supporters play? If a client requests a supporter can help a client in figuring out logistics. They can help a client communicate. For example, a supporter might be able to re-speak a client's words if a client's speech is difficult to understand and that person understands how that person communicates. They can help a client understand legal, medical, or other complex concepts, and they can enact the plan that was made in the supportive decision-making process. What's important for everyone to recognize and remember is that the client is the client. Even if they have a supporter, you're not asking the supporter for their thoughts, you're asking the supporter to engage with the client, so the client is the one in the driver's seat. Next slide, please. And this is a beautiful graphic on supportive decision-making. It's up to you. Next slide. And I'll give it to Karen.
Okay, hi, this is Karis back again. Peer support, yay, my favorite topic. Okay, next slide. So we've generally talked about peer support as it pertains to the person who is living with a mental health and or substance use condition, supporting another person with mental health and or substance use condition. Right now, I want to help us remember that we also have family peer support, which is a parent, family, or caregiver who is providing support to another family, parent, or caregiver. So a family peer supporter does not help a person with lived experience who is the care respondent. They may help the family member of that respondent. So think of it, that's the peerness, right? So in California that we do have a specialization in the certification for family peer support. There's also volunteer groups, of course, that do family or parent peer support. And evidence shows that, again, it offers hope, guidance, advocacy, camaraderie. It also helps family members have more confidence in helping their loved one on their road to recovery. Next slide. I want to talk a little bit about peer respites. We're probably going to skip over the audio on this because I think it doesn't have captions, which it should, but I don't know. But anyway, what is a peer respite? This is someone talking about the power of peer respites. They run a peer respite in Wisconsin. And in her testimony here, which was on my my podcast, she was talking about when the community struggles with supporting people, then we have to have other places where in the community we can find that support. And peer respites are voluntary, they're home-like, they have peer support in them, they're 24/7, they are not housing, they're exactly respite. So let's move to the next slide. You might have to go twice, whoever's doing the slides. Okay, cool. All right. Whoop, no, back one. Sorry, my bad. All right, so peer respites, again, it's voluntary, short-term, overnight, and it provides a community-based, non-clinical crisis support to people to help them find a new way to work through the situation that they're going through right now. And I think of many of our care respondents and how peer respite might be a place that will be helpful for them, either at the beginning, intermediate, at any time when they're feeling they just need a little bit more support 24/7, so that they're in a home-like environment around others and with the peer staff. So they are not psychiatric emergency rooms. People are in charge of taking their own medications. They are locked and they're in charge of, being responsible for keeping them safe. And yeah, let's go to the next slide so I can show you a little bit more here. We have some of the outcomes from peer respites, which is about 70% are less likely to use inpatient or emergency services. Respite days are associated with significantly fewer inpatient and emergency services hours. There are also statistically significant improvements in healing, empowerment, and satisfaction. Respite guests also experience greater improvement in self-esteem, self-rated mental health symptoms, and social activities, especially as compared to those who are in inpatient facilities. Next slide. So in California, we have a number of peer respites, and these are where they're located. So we wanted to make sure you had access to providing this information. It may be something that a person would want in their RAP plan or in their psychiatric advance directive or in their care agreement or care plan. I don't think we've added any new ones. There may be a new one in LA. I don't know if it's opened yet in Hollywood, but these currently are the respites that are available in California. These are volunteer, outside of the specialty mental health directly operated. Generally, the services within a peer respite are not Medicaid reimbursable, so they have other funding mechanisms. So that you can see that these are part of the system, but they are not part of the Medicaid system, if you will. So, or the specialty mental health in that way, but they can be contracted with specialty mental health. Next slide.
Okay, back to me, Claudia. So one thing to know is that care court respondents have priority for behavioral health bridge housing program. And so this is important because there are very few services that are additional or special for care court respondents. This is one of the few where care court respondents theoretically have priority for these housing projects. And we have some links here where you can try to figure out where the bridge housing dollars are in your county and advocate for your client to have priority in one of those programs. We're also trying to figure out if there should be some Public Record Act requests to some of these to kind of drill down on the where the dollars are and what housing is funded by these dollars, or if we can figure it out through existing public information, but that's sort of TBD. But here are the links we do have. Next slide. We have a couple of care court reports that we wanted to share with you. You've probably read articles about at least the early implementation report from November 2024. And we do have some questions, so I'm gonna, you all can read these on your own time. So I'm gonna keep going. Next slide. We had a request from Disability Rights California. DRC would like to hear directly from care court respondents about their experiences for DRC to better understand how care court is being implemented in different counties and its impact on disabled people. And if you know care court respondents who might be willing to talk to DRC, please refer them to Samuel Jane. His email is here and his phone number here, 916-504-5929. Next slide. Okay, we have 4 questions in the Q&A. The first one is anyone collecting statewide best practices that we can use to identify the practices that most benefit people who are care court respondents? Karis, do you have an answer on that one?
2025, I'm still on mute. I don't off the top of my head, as part of the CARE Act work group and the data ad hoc work group, this is not a requirement as per the act. There are certain things that need to be or shall be collected, but I don't believe we're looking at collecting data about best practices. It's a great question, and the only thing I would say is that some of the things that I've even talked about today, we don't have, but they are in other states working with this exact population. So it's almost like, well, what best practices are we missing? Which would be another interesting question to ask as well. So, but I can double check into that and Claudia, get you an answer if you're going to report back to.
Sure, we can do that.
Okay.
And also another thing I think is tricky is that I believe the care court plans are probably using different terminology, county to county and person to person. So I don't know how, I don't know. That's another question. Okay, what happens to individuals who lack immigrant legal status who are in care court? So I did see this question earlier, and I'm going to share a document from one of our support centers, the Immigrant Legal Resource Center, in the chat. And there are protections that California tries to implement for people who are going to court, including care court would be included, to try to protect them from immigration detention or other interference from immigration. I can't say at this time how that's working for care court respondents. I could reach out to ILRC and see if they've seen anything. The next question is, do we know if care courts are providing clients with translations of the services and the treatment plans? I know that they should be. If they aren't doing that for one of your clients, please do reach out to me or to Kavya, and we will try to fix it for your client. Not saying we have a magic wand, but the laws say that the courts are supposed to provide language access to participants in state court. We have those citations. They should also be putting things in plain language, like 5th grade English, which they haven't done. So do reach out if you have a client with a particular need, and we'll do what we can. Another question is the Psychiatric Advance Directive. Are they currently enforceable in California? And if not, why not? I don't fully know the answer to this, and I'll pass it to Karis in a minute. I do know that there was a bill called AB 2352 that failed, that was about psychiatric advance directives, and that was in the 23-24 term for the California legislature. So it may be that that's why DRC removed the form it had. We do have still have a written advanced healthcare directive that we know is legally enforceable. So we can, use that form and just try to adapt it, and it should be legally enforceable. But Karis, what do you know on this one?
It's complex.
Okay,
So,
sorry. Yeah, I oversimplified, I'm sure.
yeah, no worries, no worries. I think particularly that bill also had parts related to being able to use like an online database to store your psychiatric advance directive, which then became sort of, well, wow, how do you keep that safe? Who has access to it? Those sorts of things. So I'm not quite sure exactly why the form has been taken off the website. But definitely we can get back to you on that as well. I didn't know it had been taken off. So yeah.
There's another question. How can we advocate for youth and young adults to access these services? At least for full service partnership, the eligibility criteria are broader for youth and young adults. I forget if it's 18 and younger or 21 and younger, but it's a broader standard for younger people. We haven't fully prepared about youth and young adults for this session because care court is 18 and older. But certainly the services should be designed appropriately for this population. Kavya or Karis, I'll let you all chime in.
Yeah, care court is 18 and above. And I think advocating for appropriate housing because there had been some discussion about using nursing homes for 18, 19, 21 years old, which might not be the best setting for young people. But I think anything else that at least that I've talked about relative to wellness recovery action plans, recovery-oriented cognitive therapy, peer support. We do have youth peer support and a specialization for youth peer support, and also parent of a youth. So that parent peer support, those are things that definitely could be put into a care plan already.
Our next question is, do you know of any counties who have been pushing the language in the CARE Act that says if the county elects not to enroll the respondents into FSPs, the court may request the reasons for why not? I haven't heard of anything in particular. I just reading some tea leaves, I have a feeling the counties are sort of eventually putting people in FSP before it gets that far, but Karis, I'd love to hear your intel.
I have no intel on this as of yet.
Okay. The next question is, FEHA is in conflict with care courts that include a treatment plan that mandates specific housing. I actually am not sure I understand that one. Michelle, do you want to write me an email on that one? We have reached the end of our 1 hour and 15 minutes. Thank you all for being with us, and we will see you again, I'm sure. Oh, and please do reach out if you have any of the problems that we talked about today with a particular respondent, and we'll do Dread FS Support Center will try to help you solve your problem. Thank you, everybody.